Hello, today I will introduce you to Packmind, which is the tech lead copilot that will help you to capture every technical decision you can have within your team or your company, and then spread those technical decisions directly within the IDE of every developers or directly with your AI coding assistant like GitHub Copilot or Cursor. First of all, Packmind will capture those technical decisions directly from your Git merge request command, for example, or directly from some static content like some documentation pages directly in Confluence or Notion, or directly with manual contribution of developers from their IDE. Then the technical leaders or architect will validate those practices, and then they will appear directly in the IDE of every developer like a linter specific rule or directly in the CI. And every rule that you validate within Packmind will be enforced directly within your AI coding assistant like GitHub Copilot through instruction file or directly through MCP. From a documentation page like this one in Notion, I can just select this piece of static content and add it into Packmind into the inbox section. Then I can click on New, use AI generation, say, okay, it's about Java, and pass the content of my documentation. And then Packmind will automatically generate a rule about this documentation, like this one, use repository interface for domain layer interaction with a name, a description, and some good and bad example of code with a description of why it is a bad example or a positive example. The same kind of practice generation will be done directly from your Git merge request comment, like this one. I said to someone that there is a mistake within this code. The developer just pushed the error message into the payload, and in fact, you should push the full error object with the context, the stack trace, etc. So I added this comment, add the full error in the payload instead of the message only. Every week, Packmind will look through the new merge request comment and will generate practices from those, from the most repeated one, for example. Like this one, include full error details in error payload with a name, a description, and positive and negative example. And I can click on this button to see why this practice has been generated. So here it's coming from 4 different comments. Once I validate this practice, it will appear directly in the IDE of every developer. So for example, if I just make the same mistake right there, Packmind will say to me, okay, you should include the full error object instead of just the error message. I also have the ability to click on this button to have Packmind suggest me a fix for this mistake. Now, if I'm using some tools like GitHub Copilot or Cursor, for example, directly from my practices list, I have this button, Coding Assistant, where Packmind is able to generate some files for me, some instruction file, GitHub Copilot instruction or Cursor rules. And these files will contain every practices that we have within our company. It will group those practices by categories like this one, testing, React, coding style, accessibility, etc. And when I will use GitHub Copilot chat, for example, in this example, I just ask GitHub Copilot to refactor this old Java test file, and Copilot will use our base coding practices to refactor this file. So I can be sure that the instruction that I just gave to GitHub Copilot will always contains every practices we validated with our team. Now, directly with MCP, GitHub Copilot is able to communicate with Packmind. For example, right there, if I see an improvement for this method, for example, here there is a for each and an array concatenation, and we can replay that with a flat map. I can select this piece of code, ask to Copilot to refactor it with a flat map. So GitHub Copilot will improve this code. Now that this code has been improved with the usage of flat map, I can identify that this is a good practice that maybe need to be used by the whole team, and in the new generated code, we should retrieve flat map instead of for each and array concatenation. So here I can just ask GitHub Copilot to generate a practice into Packmind about this. So I just need to ask GitHub Copilot to create a practice in my Space Marketplace web. For that, GitHub Copilot is using MCP to communicate directly within Packmind. Now this practice has been generated. You can see the details here. And right now, if I go back into Packmind and take a look at my inbox section, I can see that there is a new practice. Use flat map for array transformation with nested result. Now, another great feature is that directly in the GitHub Copilot instruction, I can add an instruction for GitHub Copilot to always run the custom linter Packmind after making some changes within the code. So here, if I ask GitHub Copilot to generate a new method, for example, so now you can see that GitHub Copilot generated this method, and here there is a mistake because GitHub Copilot added the error.message. So now automatically GitHub Copilot launched the Packmind CLI to see if there is any violation within the code it generated. He saw that there is some violation, and he now uses MCP to get the description of the practices to see how he can fix them. So automatically he fixes the code. So you can see here that the payload now returned the full error object. And now he asked me to run the Packmind CLI again to see if there is any remaining violation. No, there is no still remaining violation. So right now the code is perfect. With this new integration between Packmind and GitHub Copilot or Cursor, you can see that you can be sure that the new generated code follow every best coding practices you want to push within your organization about architecture, performance, security, design system, accessibility, etc. So you can be sure that with Packmind acting as a technical leader for GitHub Copilot or for every developer within your company, you can spread best coding practices at scale without having to repeat the same things again and again in the code reviews.